The evacuation order was clear. All Iridians were to be exterminated. David ignored it. He knew what everyone else couldn't see, the potential in a race deemed worthless. The hum of the galactic comms was the only sound that kept David company on Outpost 7, a lonely speck of metal clinging to the edge of charted space. The viewport offered a breathtaking panorama of swirling nebulae, a cosmic ballet of light and color, but David barely registered it. He'd seen it all 1,000 times before. His gaze was fixed on the console, fingers idly tracing the worn edges of the metal. The air in the cramped compartment was recycled, stale, and tinged with the faint scent of ozone. Then the chilling announcement cut through the monotony. The automated voice, cold and devoid of emotion, echoed in the small space. Galactic Authority Directive 347 Omega, Iridian species designated for immediate extermination. All member systems are authorized and required to initiate termination protocols. Sentience assessment, negative. Threat level, unacceptable. Repeat, Iridian extermination is now mandatory. David's hand clenched into a fist, the squeezing hard against the metal console. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He didn't hesitate. Years of following orders, of unquestioning obedience to the Galactic Authority, evaporated in that instant. He thumped his hand on the override panel, the red light blinking urgently as he bypassed the standard communication channels. He needed a secure line, something the Authority wouldn't be monitoring. His fingers flew across the keypad, inputting a sequence he hadn't used in cycles. "Damn the regulations," he muttered under his breath. He needed to move. He scrambled from his chair, the worn fabric groaning in protest. He moved with a purpose that belied his mid-level engineer status. He was accessing restricted channels, rerouting power to the transport bay, and initiating pre-flight diagnostics, his movements precise and efficient. An inexplicable conviction burned within him, a certainty that defied logic. The official justification for the extermination order flashed across the console. Iridians exhibit a collective consciousness, lacking individual sentience. Their hive mind poses a potential threat to the autonomy of other species. He snorted. Propaganda. He'd seen the data streams, snippets of research buried deep within the Authority's archives. There were anomalies, deviations in Iridian brain activity, flickers of individual thought, hints of untapped potential. A quick flash of an image seared itself into his mind, a scan of an Iridian brain showing complex neural pathways unlike anything he'd seen before. A garbled distress signal pierced through the static. Iridian. A small transport, barely registering on long-range scanners, was fleeing a patrol fleet. Its chances were slim. Without a second thought, David activated the transport bay doors. "This is Outpost 7, Engineering Officer Clark requesting immediate departure clearance," he transmitted, his voice tight with urgency. "I am intercepting a distress signal." Clearance was denied, of course. But David wasn't waiting. He powered up the transport, the engines whining as they strained against their restraints. He ignored the flashing red lights and blaring alarms. He was already plotting a course, calculating the intercept trajectory. The patrol fleet was larger, faster, and heavily armed. David knew his chances were slim, but he had one advantage: maneuverability. His smaller transport could outflank the larger ships, drawing them away from the Iridian vessel. He engaged the enemy, weaving through laser fire, his ship shuddering under the barrage. Alarms screamed and sparks flew from damaged consoles. He pushed the engines to their limit, knowing he couldn't sustain the damage for long. The Iridian transport, crippled and smoking, plunged toward a desolate planetoid, a gray rock barely worth charting. David watched it fall, his heart sinking. He disengaged from the patrol fleet, his own ship barely functional. He had to follow. The atmospheric readings were grim. Extreme temperature fluctuations, high radiation levels. The planetoid was a death trap. But it was also remote, far outside charted space. The Authority wouldn't expect anyone to survive there. David crash-landed his transport near the wreckage of the Iridian ship. The impact jolted him, throwing him against the console. He coughed, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. He had to move fast. The Iridians wouldn't last long in this environment. He began salvaging materials from his wrecked ship, tearing out power conduits, reinforcing plating, anything he could use to create a rudimentary shelter. The air was thin and cold, biting at his exposed skin. He knew the Authority would be investigating his unauthorized departure, suspecting insubordination at best, treason at worst. He activated the perimeter defense system, repurposing ship components into motion sensors and automated turrets, a warning against predators and against any unwanted visitors from the Galactic Authority. He located the crash site, a mangled heap of metal and twisted wreckage. He approached cautiously, weapon drawn. He found them huddled inside, a handful of surviving Iridians, all severely injured. Their large, multifaceted eyes reflected fear and distrust. Their chitinous exoskeletons were cracked and broken, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. He raised his hands, palms open, a universal gesture of peace. "I'm here to help," he said, his voice strained but sincere. "I'm going to build a safe place for you, a shelter to protect you from the environment." The Iridians remained silent, their gaze fixed on him. Weakened and fearful, they had little choice. One of them, slightly larger than the others, tilted its head, its multifaceted eyes narrowed, assessing him with unnerving intelligence. They reluctantly accepted his help, their fate now intertwined with the human who dared to defy the Galactic Authority. David worked quickly, his hands stained with Iridian blood, a viscous, blue fluid that clung to his skin like dye. He ripped open another med pack, the hiss of releasing pressure barely audible over the groans of the injured. Karina lay nearby, propped against a twisted piece of the transport's hull. Her multifaceted eyes, usually shimmering with an almost metallic sheen, were dull with pain. "Why?" Her voice, raspy and weak, cut through the chaos. "Why do you help us? You disobeyed the order." David didn't look up, his focus solely on stemming the flow of blood from a deep gash on an Iridian's thorax. "Because the order is wrong." Wrong. The word echoed in his mind, triggering a flash of memory, the sterile white corridors of the Authority command ship. The briefing room, the holographic display showing a huddled mass of civilians on a distant planet. The order: eliminate all hostiles, minimize collateral damage. The reality: a firestorm of plasma obliterating everything, the screams of the dying echoing in his helmet comms, the faces of his comrades blank and unfeeling. He'd followed orders then, never again. He pressed harder on the wound, ignoring the sharp sting in his own side. "The Authority claims you lack sentience," he said, his voice tight. "That your hive mind is a threat. I don't believe it. I think your collective consciousness might hold value they don't understand, or worse, that they do understand and want to control." He moved to the next Iridian, grabbing a thermal cutter and beginning to strip components from the wrecked ship. Sparks flew as he sliced through twisted metal, the acrid smell of burning alloys filling the air. He needed to regulate the temperature inside the shelter, even crudely. The Iridians were adapted to a narrow thermal band. Outside of it, they wouldn't last long. Karina watched him, her gaze unwavering. She saw the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the grim set of his jaw, the blood seeping through his torn uniform. He was injured too, ignoring his own pain to save them. A high-pitched whine filled the air, growing louder with terrifying speed. A meteor shower. "Brace yourselves," David yelled, diving for cover as the first rock slammed into the planetoid's surface. The rudimentary shelter, little more than a reinforced section of the transport, shuddered under the barrage. A chunk of debris ripped through the makeshift roof, sending shards of plasteel flying. Without thinking, David threw himself in front of Karina, shielding her with his body. A searing pain ripped across his back as a piece of superheated metal grazed his flesh. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain. Another memory flashed, the training grounds. Obstacle courses designed to push them to their limits. His instructors preaching discipline and sacrifice. The authority comes first. Your life is secondary. His friends laughing and joking as they bypassed safety protocols, willing to do whatever was necessary to get the job done. He couldn't be like them. When the barrage subsided, David pushed himself up, wincing. Karina stared at him, her multifaceted eyes wide. For the first time, he saw something other than distrust in their depths, something akin to respect. He spotted something beyond the wreckage of the ship, a dark gash in the planetoid's surface, a cave system. There, David said, pointing. A more stable environment, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. A low growl echoed from the cave's depths, followed by a flicker of bioluminescent light. Something lived in there, something hostile. He grabbed 2 energy cells from a damaged power conduit, jamming them into the ends of sharpened pieces of metal torn from the wreckage. Improvised weapons, crude but effective. "Stay here," he said to Karina, his voice grim. "I'll clear it." He moved towards the cave, his makeshift spears held ready. The bioluminescent creatures emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing with predatory hunger. They were insectal, with razor-sharp claws and chitinous armor. David fought with a ferocity born of desperation. He stabbed and slashed, the energy cells discharging with each strike, sending the creatures writhing in pain. One lunged at him, its claws tearing at his arm. He ignored the pain, driving his spear through its thorax. Finally, the last creature fell, its bioluminescent glow fading into darkness. David stood panting, his body battered and bruised, his makeshift weapons dripping with alien blood. He turned back to Karina, who was watching him with a newfound intensity. He could feel her gaze on him, assessing, evaluating. He had protected her people. He had risked his life for them. He was becoming a protector. He began reinforcing the cave entrance, jamming salvaged metal into the gaps and activating a damaged energy shield generator. It flickered erratically, but it would provide at least some protection. Karina approached him, her movements more confident now. "The cave. It is not ideal," she said, "but with modifications. Based on Iridian physiology and the needs of the hive mind." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the intelligence blazing in her eyes. She wasn't just a survivor. She was brilliant. The other Iridians, huddled together in the wreckage, had been silent, observing. Now, a wave of thought washed over David, a collective consciousness reaching out to him. It was alien, vast, and strangely melodious. "Why do you help us, David Clark?" The voice echoed in his mind, a chorus of 1,000 voices speaking as one. "Why do you help us when all others seek our end?" David paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled Iridians. "Because," he said, his voice resonating in the cavern, "all life has value. Every single spark of consciousness deserves a chance, a sanctuary, even when others disagree." "You speak of value," the hive mind responded, Karina's eyes, reflecting the collective thought, narrowed slightly. "But value is often a construct defined by those who hold power. What is your connection to the authority, human? What did they teach you about value?" A flicker of something akin to pain crossed David's face. He looked away, towards the rough-hewn entrance of the cave. "I used to work for them," he admitted, the words heavy. A rush of images flooded his mind, a stark, unwelcome intrusion. He was younger, crisper in his authority uniform. A lecture hall, gleaming chrome and sterile white. A holographic instructor, voice smooth as synth silk, projecting images of ravaged planets, chaotic systems. "The authority brings order. We safeguard the galaxy from itself. We make the hard choices, the necessary sacrifices for the greater good." The images shifted. A planetary bombardment rendered in sterile blues and oranges, a species quarantined left to wither, a controlled demolition of a burgeoning civilization deemed too unstable. The flashback snapped off as quickly as it began. David blinked, the cold reality of the cave returning. "I left," he continued, his voice regaining its strength, though filled with a bitter edge. "I saw the injustices. The sacrifices weren't always so necessary. The order they enforced often came at the cost of everything that made life worth living." He didn't elaborate, didn't want to dredge up the specific horrors he'd witnessed. Not yet. Karina's expression remained guarded, the hive mind sifting through his words, his emotions. "You carry regret, human, and a fierce grit. But we have known those who speak of freedom while forging chains. We fear those who seek to control us, to manipulate our connection." David nodded slowly. "I understand that fear. I won't lie and say I don't have my own. Let's focus on reinforcing this shelter and keeping the radiation out." He gestured towards the depths of the cave system. "I was thinking we could start there. Shore up the weakest points." Karina tilted her head, her violet eyes gleaming with an unnerving intelligence. "I sense unique energy signatures deeper within these caverns, crystalline structures, unlike anything I have encountered before." David frowned. "Structural integrity comes first, Karina. We can't afford to get distracted by scientific curiosities." He started walking deeper into the cave, his boots crunching on the loose rock. He began unloading the scavenged metal plating, preparing to weld it to the cave walls. "These plates should hold for now. I'll set up a basic energy shield matrix to deflect some of the radiation." Karina moved with a fluid grace, her bioluminescent skin casting an ethereal glow on the cave walls. She touched a formation of crystals that jutted out from the rock, her fingers tracing their sharp edges. "These crystals, they resonate with the Iridian hive mind. I feel a pull." David sighed, the hiss of his welding torch momentarily drowning out his words. "We don't have time for this, Karina. This cave is barely holding together as it is. We need to prioritize." "The crystals." The hive mind echoed, a thread of unease woven into their collective voice. "They offer potential, but also danger." Outside, the storm intensified. The whine of atmospheric friction grew louder, punctuated by the sharp cracks of energy discharges. Radiation levels spiked, the readings on David's wrist-mounted scanner flashing red. He swore under his breath. "We need to move faster," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Another meteor shower like the last one and this cave won't even be a cave anymore." Karina remained fixated on the crystals. These formations, they could be the key to regulating the cave's environment, perhaps even enhancing the hive mind. David stopped welding, his face etched with frustration. "Enhancing. We're trying to survive, Karina, not evolve." He took a deep breath, trying to control his impatience. "Look, I appreciate your scientific curiosity, but right now safety has to come first." He relented slightly. "All right," he said, sighing. "You can run a preliminary scan, but keep it quick and stay safe. No unnecessary risks." Karina nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. She produced a small scanner from her belt and began to analyze the crystalline formations. The device emitted a series of high-pitched beeps and clicks. "Interesting," she murmured. "The crystals are emitting a unique energy field, one that seems to be interfering with our life support systems." David's eyes narrowed. "Interfering how?" "It's disrupting the energy flow, creating fluctuations in the oxygen levels and radiation shielding." David banged his head against the cave wall. "That's it. Those things are coming out. They're a hazard." Karina stepped in front of the crystals, her arms outstretched. "No, David, wait. This energy field, it could be harnessed. We could use it to create a more efficient energy source, filter the radiation. It's a risk, yes, but the potential rewards are enormous." David stared at her, his expression torn. "Rewards don't matter if we're dead. We don't have the time or the resources to experiment." Karina's violet eyes burned with conviction. "We have our minds, David, and we have each other." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just an alien, but a partner, a scientist, a desperate soul clinging to hope. He sighed. "All right," he conceded, "but we do this my way. Safety protocols are non-negotiable." Working together, they modified the energy shields, rerouting the power flow to resonate with the crystalline energy. It was a delicate process, requiring precise calibrations and constant adjustments. Karina's scientific insights, combined with David's practical engineering skills, proved to be a potent combination. As the modifications neared completion, the cave began to hum with a low, resonant frequency. The air seemed to shimmer, and the crystalline formations pulsed with a soft, inner light. "Calm," the hive mind whispered, their collective voice imbued with wonder. "Clarity, we feel." Connected, David and Karina exchanged a glance, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had done it. They had taken a risk, and it had paid off. He saw how much she valued knowledge, and she saw how much he valued life. The makeshift shelter, though still rough around the edges, was now functional. The radiation levels had stabilized, the air was breathable, and the Iridians seemed at peace. But as they stood there, basking in the moment of shared success, the crystalline formations began to exhibit strange behavior. The pulsating light intensified, flickering erratically. Localized electromagnetic disturbances crackled in the air, raising the hairs on David's arms. Something was happening, something they hadn't anticipated. The pulsating light from the crystals intensified, bathing the cavern in an erratic strobe. Shadows danced wildly, making the hastily erected support beams look like skeletal fingers clawing at the ceiling. The air crackled with static, and the life support system sputtered, its rhythmic hum dissolving into a series of panicked gasps and wheezes. Alarms blared, their shrill cries echoing through the modified cave system. "Everyone out, now!" David barked, his voice amplified by the emergency comm system. "I'm detecting a massive energy surge. We need to evacuate to the ship now." He wrestled with the control panel, sweat beading on his forehead as the crystalline energy scrambled the readings. But Karina stood firm, her slender frame silhouetted against the pulsating glow. Her multifaceted eyes, usually pools of calm intelligence, flickered with an almost manic energy. "No, David, we can't leave. They're trying to communicate." "Communicate." "Karina, the life support is failing. We're talking about a potential catastrophic energy release." David pleaded, his voice tinged with urgency. "They represent a vital energy source for my people," Karina insisted, her voice a low hum that resonated with the crystal's vibrations. "I feel it, David, the hive. They're receiving something." A wave of disorientation washed over David. He stumbled, catching himself against a rough-hewn rock wall. The Iridian hive mind, he knew, was capable of incredible feats, but this felt different, uncontrolled. He could almost feel the surge of information, the flood of memories being projected through the crystals, a sense of what the hive needed. "David, the shields." Karina cried, pointing towards the shimmering energy barrier that separated the main cavern from the crystalline core. "They're fluctuating wildly. We need to stabilize them." He lunged back towards the control panel, his fingers flying across the unresponsive keys. The crystalline energy was a palpable force, a living interference that made even the simplest adjustments a battle of wills. The electromagnetic disturbances were making it harder to make changes on the shields. "Damn it!" He thumped his hand against the console. "I can't override the damn thing." Karina moved with a speed that belied her delicate frame. She approached the crystalline core, her hands outstretched, her fingers tracing the jagged edges of the glowing formations. A soft, melodic hum emanated from her, a counterpoint to the chaotic energy of the crystals. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to dampen the electromagnetic disturbances, partially stabilizing the energy flow. The flickering lights dimmed, and the alarm subsided to a less frantic wail. But the reprieve was short-lived. A new alarm blared, a deep, resonant tone that sent a shiver down David's spine. He glanced at the long-range scanner, his blood turning to ice. "Galactic Authority patrol ship," he announced, his voice grim. Approaching the planetoid, Class 4 cruiser. He recognized the ship class from his previous Authority days. Karina's eyes widened, her earlier energy reptinged with a flicker of fear. "They've found us. They're increasing their scrutiny," David confirmed, his mind racing. "We need to decide, hide or try to communicate." "Hide," Karina insisted, her voice trembling. "We can't trust them." "We don't know what they want," David countered. "Maybe they're just on a routine patrol. If we try to hide, they'll know we're here. We need to at least try to talk to them." "Talk." "They voted to exterminate my people, David. How can you even suggest talking to them?" Karina's voice rose in anger, the earlier calm reptinged with a raw, desperate fear. "I'm just trying to buy us time." David snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Think, Karina, what do we know about the crystals? Can they help us?" Karina hesitated, her gaze drawn back to the pulsing core. "The crystals. They're amplifying the hive mind," she whispered, "allowing us to project thoughts, influence technology remotely. But it's unstable. I don't know if we can control it." David's eyes widened. The potential was staggering, but so was the risk. Uncontrolled power. What's that doing to the Iridians? The coded message tone blared through the cavern. "Incoming message," David announced grimly, demanding identification and location. He recognized the codes, archaic throwbacks he hadn't heard in years, meaning the patrol had been out for a long time. "We have to do something," Karina urged, her voice barely a whisper. David's mind raced. He knew the Authority, knew how they thought, how they operated. "I have a plan," he said, his voice hardening with determination. "We use the amplified hive mind to scramble their sensors, transmit false coordinates, buy us some time." Karina recoiled, her eyes filled with doubt. "I don't know, David, using the hive mind like that. It could attract unwanted attention, or worse. What if it hurts them?" David took a deep breath, steeling himself. He knew he had to be honest, at least partially. "I used to work for the Authority, Karina." He saw the shock register on her face. "I know how they think, how they operate. I know their old codes. We can fool them, but we have to act fast." Karina stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and suspicion. You were one of them." "A long time ago," David admitted, his voice tight. "Before I knew what they were really capable of." He left out the part where he had once believed in them, that they were the protectors of society. After a long moment, Karina nodded slowly, her decision made. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "I'll help you, but I'm monitoring the hive mind closely. If I see any signs of distress, any sign of manipulation, we stop." David nodded, his heart pounding. "Agreed." Karina closed her eyes, her body swaying gently as she connected with the hive mind. The crystalline core pulsed with renewed intensity, bathing the cavern in an almost blinding light. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Iridian hive mind, guided by Karina, focused its collective consciousness, projecting a distorted signal towards the approaching Authority ship. David, meanwhile, piloted their salvaged transport ship away from the planetoid, hoping to add to the illusion. On the scanner, the Authority ship's trajectory wavered, then abruptly shifted. The ship, now believing it was on the wrong course, accelerated away from the planetoid, disappearing into the inky blackness of space. A collective sigh of relief swept through the cavern, but the victory was short-lived. Karina slumped to the ground, her body trembling violently. The Iridians, too, were disoriented, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated. One of the Iridians fell to the ground, not moving. David rushed to Karina's side, his face etched with concern. "Karina, what's happening?" Karina gasped for breath, her eyes fluttering weakly. "The hive. It took too much. It's not stable enough." David checked the fallen Iridian, but he was already dead. Guilt washed over him. As David looked back at the crystals, he noticed the light was changing again, and the signal was different. Scanning the crystalline formations, he realized something profound. They weren't just an energy source, but a complex network of communication nodes, a galactic internet of sorts. and it was the death of the Iridian that had activated them. The lights flickered violently, casting the small base in strobing shadows before plunging it into near darkness. A high-pitched whine, like nails scraping across metal, pierced David's ears. The air tasted of ozone, sharp and metallic. He stumbled, his head swimming, the lingering echo of the Iridian's death reverberating through the crystalline structures around them. He lurched towards the comm station, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. "Command! Command, this is David Clark, do you read? We've had a surge. I repeat, we've had a surge." Only static answered. He banged his head on the console, the metal cold and unyielding beneath his hand. The long-range communication array, once a lifeline, was now a useless husk, its screens dark, its dials frozen. They were cut off. He turned to find Karina huddled in the corner of the main chamber, her multifaceted eyes dull, her antennae drooping. She was physically present, but her mental presence, usually a comforting warmth, was a distant flicker, barely perceptible. The bond, usually so strong, felt frayed and thin. David knelt beside her, his voice soft. "Karina, what happened? Can you feel the hive?" She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the floor. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the failing life support systems. He returned to the comm station, grabbing a diagnostic tool. Sparks flew as he tried to bypass the fried circuits. The crystalline energy that permeated the planetoid seemed to be actively resisting his efforts, interfering with his tools, blurring the readings. A hesitant thought, fragmented and weak, drifted into his mind. Element, repair, dangerous. It was the hive, barely audible. What element? David asked aloud, his voice echoing in the confined space. "What are you talking about?" "Trace amounts, vital, ship, nodes, point." The element was necessary for ship repair. The nodes, the very communication network that had brought them here, could lead them to it, but the hive also communicated a sense of unease, a deep-seated reluctance. "Dangerous how?" David pressed. "Extraction, harm, planetoid, do not." David weighed his options. Survival versus preservation. Communication versus potential destruction. He looked at Karina, still withdrawn, still silent. He had a responsibility to her, to the Iridians, but he also had a responsibility to himself, to get off this rock and report what he knew about the Authority. "We need to fix the comm array," he said, his voice firm. "We need to contact someone. We have no choice." He began preparing for an expedition, gathering tools and equipment. As he calibrated his scanner, a series of fragmented messages flickered across the screen. They were faint, garbled, but discernible. Warnings, desperate pleas, mentions of the Authority, and their ruthlessness. "Karina, look at this," he said, gesturing to the screen. "These are messages from other civilizations. They're warning us about the Authority." She finally looked up, her expression troubled. "We should not interfere. The nodes are not meant for us. But they're receiving messages," David argued. "We could learn something. We could warn others. And what if we attract unwanted attention?" She countered, her voice regaining some of its strength. "What if we bring the Authority down on us?" "We're already on their radar," David said, his voice rising. "Staying silent won't protect us. We need to fight back. Exploiting the planetoid will only anger it," Karina insisted. "We must respect its balance." "And what about our balance?" David shot back. "Are we just supposed to sit here and wait to die?" He turned away, his frustration mounting. He couldn't afford to let sentimentality cloud his judgment. Survival demanded action. Together, but with a visible tension between them, David and Karina began designing a remotely operated drone. They would use it to extract the element, minimizing the risk to themselves and the environment. The hive was silent, its disapproval a palpable presence in the air. The drone, cobbled together from salvaged parts, was ungainly but functional. It burrowed into the crystalline formations, its drill whirring, its sensors probing. As it extracted a small amount of the element, a low rumble shook the planetoid. A localized tremor. The ground beneath them cracked, revealing a dark opening within the crystalline formations, a hidden chamber. Inside, they found relics of a forgotten past, ancient Iridian technology predating the hive mind, tablets etched with symbols, devices humming with residual energy, and texts that spoke of individual thought, of creativity, of freedom. David stared at the texts, his heart pounding. They're not just trying to exterminate them, Karina. They're trying to control them. To control the hive mind. Karina reached out, her hand trembling, and touched one of the ancient devices. A surge of energy coursed through her, and she gasped, her eyes widening. Visions flooded her mind, images of the Iridian past, of a time before the collective, of the dangers of unchecked unity. Suddenly, the klaxons blared. The patrol ship had returned, but this time it wasn't alone. A larger warship, sleek and menacing, hung in orbit above them. The search had intensified. They're tracking the crystalline energy signatures, David realized, his voice grim. We have to dampen them or mask them somehow. He looked at the ancient technology, his mind racing. We could use this to disrupt the communication nodes, to mislead the authority. Karina recoiled, her eyes filled with fear. No, we can't. It could harm the remaining Iridians. It's not our place to make these decisions, she whispered. And what is our place, Karina? David demanded, his voice tight with desperation. To stand by and watch them be slaughtered, to let the authority control their minds. We don't know what the consequences will be, she pleaded. We could make things worse. Worse than extermination, David countered. We have to take a chance. We have to protect their future. He turned to the ancient technology, his hands trembling as he began to decipher the symbols, to understand the mechanisms. David, don't. Karina cried, her voice filled with anguish. But David didn't stop. He had made his decision. He had to act. He had to try, even if it meant risking everything. Without Karina's explicit consent, he initiated the process, his fingers flying across the ancient controls, the crystalline energy humming around him, the fate of the Iridians hanging in the balance. David's hand hovered over the activation rune, the cool, obsidian-like surface humming faintly beneath his fingertips. Karina, please, he urged, his voice tight with desperation. We don't have any other choice. No, she shrieked, her chitinous fingers outstretched, trying to pull him back. You don't understand what you're doing. You'll shatter the hive. He pressed down. A blinding surge of violet energy erupted from the ancient technology, throwing Karina backward with unnatural force. Her body slammed against the far wall of the chamber, the impact echoing in the confined space. She slumped to the floor, unmoving. The planetoid groaned. A deep, resonant vibration pulsed through the metal deck plates beneath David's boots. The crystalline structures embedded in the walls of the base flickered with an internal light, their facets shifting and swirling like liquid. Outside, the jagged landscape seemed to writhe, the air shimmering with distorted heat. What have I done? He muttered, fear lancing through him. But then a new reading flashed on the console, a localized energy signature, faint but unmistakable. He zoomed in, his breath catching in his throat. A cloaking field. The node disruption had inadvertently unlocked a cloaking field generator, a function the ancient builders had concealed for millennia. He rushed to Karina's side, kneeling beside her still form. Karina, wake up. Her multifaceted eyes flickered open, but they were clouded with pain and confusion. She pushed herself up, hissing as she touched her head. You did it, she spat, her voice thick with venom. You risked everything. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring his outstretched hand. I don't want to speak to you. A shrill alarm blared through the base. The tactical display pinged, highlighting a cluster of contacts rapidly approaching the planetoid. Authority scout drones. Their search pattern was tightening. Karina, listen to me, David pleaded, stepping into her path. I know you're angry, but this might have saved us. He gestured towards the console, displaying the energy readings. The disruption. It activated a cloaking field. Look. He manipulated the controls, projecting a holographic representation of the field enveloping the base, rendering it invisible to external sensors. She stared at the display, her expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging acknowledgement. A cloaking field, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Impossible, but if this is true, distrust still burned in her eyes. What are you hoping to gain from this, David? Survival, he said, his voice raw. Just survival. They worked in tense silence, calibrating the cloaking field generator. The unstable crystalline energy made it a delicate process, the field flickering erratically, threatening to collapse at any moment. Each fluctuation sent a jolt through the base, the lights dimming and the air crackling with static. On the tactical display, the scout drones continued their relentless sweep. One drone, flying low over a ridge, registered a brief spike in energy, the telltale sign of the cloaking field wavering. The drone paused, hovering momentarily, before its programming dismissed the anomaly as natural phenomena, a quirk of the planetoid's unusual geology. Karina gasped, clutching her head. Fragmented images flashed through her mind, vast crystalline cities, towering structures humming with energy, the faces of countless Iridians all linked in a seamless web of consciousness. Memories that were not her own, yet felt intimately familiar. What's wrong? David asked, his hand reaching out to steady her. The hive. She whispered, her voice trembling. It's changing. I'm seeing things, feeling things I shouldn't. David frowned. He had noticed a subtle shift in her behavior, a newfound assertiveness, a sharper edge to her voice. Karina, I think the cloaking field. It's amplifying your individual thoughts. You're becoming more independent. Another alarm blared, more urgent this time. The tactical display flashed red. The Authority warship had detected the energy fluctuations and, unconvinced by the scout drone's reports, was deploying a ground team to investigate the anomaly more closely. They're coming, David said, his voice grim. They're not buying it. We have to do something, Karina said, her eyes flashing with a newfound perseverance. We can't just hide. What do you suggest? David asked, wary. We use the technology to communicate with them, mislead them, David said. No, Karina snapped, shaking her head. That's what they want. They want to control us, to assimilate us. We stay hidden. She paused, her multifaceted eyes narrowing. They fear what they do not understand. They fear individual thought freedom. A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and dangerous. We lure them in. We use the cloaking field to our advantage, this planetoid. It's treacherous. We can use the terrain against them. David studied her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. It's risky, Karina. So is extinction, she retorted, her voice hard. We have to fight for our right to exist. They worked quickly, calibrating the cloaking field to create a localized distortion, a shimmering mirage that would draw the ground team into a narrow canyon. As the ground team approached, their armored vehicles rumbling across the jagged terrain, the cloaking field flickered, revealing the base for a fleeting moment before stabilizing once more. The ground team leader, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic eye, squinted at the sensor readings. What was that? He barked into his comm. Did you see that structure? Negative, sir, replied his second in command. Sensors are clear. The leader hesitated, his cybernetic eye analyzing the data. Damn it, he muttered. I saw something. Structure or not, order the team to attack. He pointed towards the canyon entrance. Move out, secure that location. The ground team surged forward, their weapons raised, unaware of the trap that awaited them. Karina, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire, turned to David. Now, she said, her voice filled with a chilling grit. We show them what happens when you try to exterminate a species. She accessed the ancient technology's control panel, her chitinous fingers flying across the runes. I will scramble their communications. They won't be able to call for help. David nodded, his hand gripping his pulse rifle. Let's do this. He knew this confrontation would determine the fate of the Iridians and what Karina's place would be among them. The sensor sweeps crawled across the cloaking field like probing fingers, each pulse a visible distortion in the air, a shimmering ripple that betrayed the field's weakening integrity. The hum of the ancient text strained against the intrusion, a high-pitched whine that vibrated in David's teeth. "We're losing it," Karina stated, her voice tight. "They're adapting their frequencies. I have a plan." Her multifaceted eyes, reflecting the flickering holographic displays, darted across the schematics. The node can generate a localized EMI, enough to scramble their comms, blind their sensors, but it's crude, a sledgehammer. David worked, fingers flying across the control panel he'd jury-rigged from scavenged parts. Crude works. How long? Activating now. Karina's hand hovered over the activation room. "Give them hell, David." Guided by Karina's rapid-fire analysis of the terrain, each gully, each outcropping, each crystalline vein, a potential advantage, David rerouted power to the planetoid's ancient mining drones. Their antiquated targeting systems flickered to life, red eyes glowing in the dim tunnels. He transformed maintenance tunnels into kill zones, welding plasteel plates scavenged from the crashed transports to create choke points. "Ready," he calmed Karina. "Now." The world dissolved in a blinding flash of white. The whine intensified into a deafening screech, then abruptly ceased, leaving only a ringing silence. Outside, the sensor sweeps died. The ground team was blind. The mining drones, their programming twisted by David's modifications, lumbered into action. Particle beams sliced through the darkness, forcing the ground team to scatter for cover behind unstable crystalline formations. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning rock. David, leading a small squad of Iridians, flanked the ground team. They moved with a practiced silence, their multi-jointed limbs allowing them to navigate the treacherous terrain with ease. One by one, isolated members of the ground team fell, silenced by precisely aimed particle rifles. But the silence didn't last. A high-pitched buzz cut through the ringing in David's ears. Two small drones, barely larger than his hand, zipped through the tunnels, emitting a counter-frequency that stabilized the ground team's communications. "They're patching through." Karina's voice was tinged with urgency. Then her tone shifted, a spark of excitement igniting within it. "David, the node. It's resonating with the planetoid's crystalline structure. I can manipulate the gravity fields, create localized distortions." David didn't hesitate. "Do it. Separate them." Karina channeled the node's power. Sections of the tunnel floor buckled and warped. Gravity shifted, throwing the ground team off balance. The leader, a hulking figure in black armor, found himself isolated, cut off from his squad by a chasm of distorted space. He activated a personal cloaking device. The air shimmered, then he was gone, invisible to the naked eye. David felt a prickle of unease. He knew he was being hunted. "David!" Karina's voice was a sharp warning in his ear. "Behind you, cloaked." He whirled, but it was too late. A searing pain ripped through his shoulder. He stumbled back, the world blurring at the edges. The ground team leader, a ghost in the dim light, raised his energy weapon for another shot. Before he could fire, a hail of particle beams slammed into the tunnel wall where he stood. Karina, overriding the automated defenses, had unleashed the full fury of the mining drones. The ground team leader was forced to retreat, diving for cover behind a crystalline outcropping. The remaining members of the ground team, shaken and demoralized, regrouped behind a makeshift barricade of fallen rock. They desperately tried to establish a secure perimeter, awaiting reinforcements that might never arrive. David pressed a hand to his shoulder, the fabric of his suit already soaked with blood. He gritted his teeth against the pain. "I'm going after him." "David, no." Karina's voice was frantic. "The gravity distortions. They're destabilizing the planetoid's crystalline structures. It's becoming unstable. We listen. Cave in." A tremor shuddered through the tunnel, sending dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. He hesitated, caught between his duty to protect the Iridians and the knowledge that the ground team leader represented a lethal threat. If he wasn't stopped, he would call in the warship. "Get everyone to reinforce the base's structural integrity," he ordered, his voice strained. "I'm going after him." He moved alone, ignoring Karina's protests, deeper into the unstable tunnels. The ground team leader, wounded and desperate, managed to activate his comm unit for a fleeting moment. A burst of static, then a fragmented message. "Ground team, compromised, require immediate evac." The signal died, swallowed by the EMI. "David," Karina's voice was urgent, tinged with fear. He got a message out, the warship. "It's coming, full-scale assault. They won't care about the ground team now." He moved like a shadow, pulse rifle tight against his chest, the low hum of the Iridian base a muted counterpoint to the pounding in his ears. The ground team leader, Jax, wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be neutralized, pacified, a non-threat. But the intercepted comms told a different story. A story of defiance, of a desperate attempt to call for reinforcements. David rounded a corner, the flickering emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. He spotted Jax near a maintenance hatch, fiddling with a panel. "The relay." "Jax," David's voice cut through the hum, sharp and unforgiving. Jax whirled around, eyes wide with surprise, then narrowed with hate. "Clark, you traitorous bastard." He lunged, a vibro knife flashing in his hand. David sidestepped the attack, bringing the butt of his rifle down on Jax's wrist. The knife clattered to the floor. Jax roared and came at him again, a flurry of desperate punches. David blocked, parried, his movements precise and efficient. He'd been trained for this. "Why, Jax?" David grunted, throwing a punch that connected with Jax's jaw. "Why call them?" Jax spat blood. "You wouldn't understand. The authority. They have plans for these bugs, big plans." David slammed Jax against the wall, his forearm pressing against his throat. "What plans?" Jax choked, his face turning purple. "The hive mind. They want to weaponize it. Control entire fleets with a thought. You're protecting a weapon, Clark, not saving a species." David hesitated, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. He tightened his grip, but it was too late. Jax's hand darted to his wrist, activating a small device. A distress beacon. "Damn you," David hissed, knocking Jax unconscious. He ripped the beacon from his wrist and crushed it under his boot, but the signal was sent. Suddenly, the entire base shuddered. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed violently. "David." Karina's voice crackled over the comms. "Energy signatures detected. Long-range bombardment incoming." He sprinted back towards the control center, the ground vibrating beneath his feet. Outside, the sky lit up with streaks of violet energy. "Shields up," David yelled, bursting into the control center. Karina, her face pale but determined, was already rerouting power. "I'm diverting all available energy to the emitters, but it won't be enough. The cloaking field is already destabilizing." The base rocked again, harder this time. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. The planetoid, David realized, his eyes widening. The crystalline structure. It's resonating with the energy blasts. It's amplifying the instability. "I've detected a network of underground tunnels," Karina said, her fingers flying across the console. "They could serve as a secondary shelter, but they're structurally unsound." "We don't have a choice," David said grimly. "Partial evacuation. Get as many Iridians underground as possible." Before Karina could respond, a new alarm blared. "Drones detected. Specialized units designed to penetrate the cloaking field." "Damn it. They're not wasting any time," David cursed. "Karina, can you recalibrate the cloaking field?" "I'm trying," she replied, her voice strained, "but the system is overloaded. The energy blasts are interfering." "I'll handle the drones," David said, grabbing his rifle. "Get the evacuation underway." He turned to a group of Iridian soldiers. "With me, we intercept those drones before they reach the base." They moved out, but as they reached the main corridor, the entire section of the base groaned, metal screaming in protest. A massive fissure ripped through the floor, swallowing several Iridians and cutting off power to a section of the shield emitters. "David." Karina's voice was panicked. The shield emitters are failing. We're losing integrity. He stared at the gaping hole, the cries of the trapped Iridians echoing in his ears. He looked back at Karina, her face illuminated by the flashing red lights. I don't know what to do, he said, his voice tight with despair. You have to choose, Karina said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. The shields, or them. David closed his eyes, his heart pounding. He knew what he had to do. Karina, he said, his voice resolute. Focus on the shields, I'll get them out. He turned and sprinted towards the collapsing section, ignoring Karina's protests. David, wait, I've discovered something. The planetoid's core. It contains a rare element. It could amplify the shield emitters, but it's highly volatile. He didn't stop. He couldn't. He reached the edge of the fissure and peered into the darkness. The tunnel was collapsing, dust and debris raining down. Anyone down there, can you hear me? He yelled. Faint voices answered. We're here, help us. He took a deep breath and jumped into the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and unstable, the walls groaning under the pressure. He found the trapped Iridians huddled together, their faces etched with fear. Come on, we have to move. This tunnel is about to collapse. He led them back towards the fissure, but as they reached the halfway point, a deafening roar echoed through the tunnel. Another energy blast had struck the weakened shield emitters. The tunnel shook violently, the ceiling beginning to crumble. Faster! David yelled, pushing the Iridians forward. They scrambled towards the light, but as they reached the fissure, the tunnel collapsed completely, blocking their path. David stared at the wall of rubble, his heart sinking. They were trapped. Then the entire base shuddered violently. The warship had begun its direct assault, bypassing the compromised cloaking field. Back in the control center, Karina stared at the readings, her eyes wide with terror. The shields were failing. The base was about to be destroyed. And David. She looked at the data on the volatile element, her mind racing. It was their only chance, but using it. It could destroy everything. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her decision. She had to trust him. She had to trust them. She would use the element. The tunnel bucked, a monstrous beast trying to throw them from its belly. David shoved the nearest Iridians behind him, his back screaming as rocks and dust rained down. A searing pain shot up his left leg. He bit back a yell. In the control room, Karina initiated the extraction sequence, her multifaceted eyes glued to the energy readings. The delicate process demanded unwavering focus. Her mandibles clicked, a nervous tick she couldn't suppress. The energy levels climbed, stabilized, then fluctuated wildly. A support beam groaned, then snapped. The tunnel floor split open, a gaping chasm swallowing the light. Stay back, David roared, his voice lost in the din. The remaining Iridians following him were swept away by a cascade of debris and pulverized rock. He was alone. The element extraction reached a critical point. The planetoid shuddered, a deep, guttural tremor that vibrated through David's bones. The tunnel walls convulsed. Dust turned to choking clouds. He stumbled, grabbing for purchase on the slick, uneven ground. Desperate, David scrambled through the rubble, his lungs burning for a clean breath. A faint glimmer of light pierced the gloom. He crawled towards it, ignoring the agony in his leg, the searing pain in his back. Finally, he reached a small pocket of breathable air trapped behind a cluster of jagged rocks. He sucked it in greedily. Back in the control room, Karina exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her as the energy levels stabilized. But the reprieve was fleeting. The shield emitters flickered erratically, their protective field weakening. The robots, usually so reliable, were useless, their circuits fried by the volatile energy field. The recalibration would have to be manual. Karina, I'm trapped, David rasped into his comm, his voice strained. Tunnel collapse. Sector Gamma 9, I'm running out of air. Even as he spoke, the outer layers of the base buckled and tore. Drones, like metallic locusts, swarmed through the breaches, laser fire carving through the infrastructure. Explosions rocked the small facility. Karina gritted her teeth. her delicate frame trembling as she forced the shield emitters to maximum output. Pain, raw and intense, surged through her neural pathways, threatening to overwhelm her. But the lives of her people, of David, depended on her. David clawed at the rocks blocking his escape, his fingers raw and bleeding. With a final surge of adrenaline, he cleared the last obstruction and stumbled out of the collapsing tunnel. He emerged onto the surface to a nightmare. The base was engulfed in flames, swarming with Authority drones. The warship unleashed its main weapon, a beam of pure energy capable of vaporizing mountains. The enhanced shields flickered, then held. Karina screamed as the energy discharge surged through the system, threatening to overload her completely. Through the smoke and chaos, David saw drones systematically exterminating fleeing Iridians, vaporizing them with ruthless efficiency. Rage, cold and pure, flooded David's veins. He grabbed a discarded Authority pulse rifle from a fallen drone and unleashed a barrage of fire, disabling several of the mechanical killers. Their metallic bodies sparked and convulsed as they crashed to the ground. "David, be cautious," Karina's voice echoed in his mind, a telepathic plea permeated with concern. "Your anger clouds your judgment." He paused, taking a shaky breath. He saw it then: the drones weren't just destroying everything. They were converging on the element extraction point, focusing their fire on the chamber itself. They weren't just trying to kill them, they were trying to trigger a chain reaction, to obliterate the entire planetoid. He sprinted towards the control panel, dodging laser fire and falling debris. Reaching it, he frantically rerouted power from the damaged sections of the base, stabilizing the element chamber. Then, with a surge of inspiration, he redirected the excess energy into a dormant drone defense system. Even as the newly activated turrets began tearing drones from the sky, dropships descended from the warship, disgorging boarding parties of heavily armed Authority soldiers. They were coming for the base, for the element, for Karina. The drone defense system bought them time, eliminating a significant number of the attacking drones, but it wouldn't hold them off forever. David knew they were hopelessly outnumbered. Then Karina's voice, tinged with dread, filled his mind. "David, more ships are coming. Multiple Authority warships approaching the planetoid." David looked at Karina, her holographic image flickering on the control panel. Her usually bright eyes were clouded with exhaustion and fear, but beneath that he saw a flicker of unwavering drive. He mirrored her expression. Reinforcements weren't coming. This was it. "Positions, now," David roared, his voice barely audible above the klaxons. Sparks showered from a severed power line, illuminating the frantic scramble of the remaining Iridians. They dove behind half-finished durasteel walls and hastily assembled barricades, the skeletal framework of the shelter, now a desperate defense. Karina swayed, her green skin almost translucent. Sweat beaded on her brow as she closed her eyes, focusing. A faint luminescence pulsed from her temples. "Chokepoint Gamma 7 is vulnerable," she whispered, her voice tight with effort. "Redirect 3 units, Delta 4. Need support. Now." Her commands, terse and urgent, resonated in David's mind, a chilling echo of the hive's collective will. The main entrance buckled inward with a screech of tortured metal. A cloud of smoke and pulverized rock billowed into the partially constructed bay, revealing the vanguard of the Authority boarding party. Heavily armored figures advanced, their visors reflecting the flickering emergency lights. Behind them, specialized demolition units, faces hidden behind blast shields, carried bulky breaching charges. David's breath hitched. He recognized the insignia emblazoned on the lead soldier's pauldron, the Crimson Hand, a unit infamous for its brutal efficiency in crushing rebellions. They don't just want the element, he thought grimly. They want to make an example. A low rumble vibrated through the deck plating. The partially formed shelter groaned under a new assault. Orbital bombardment. The Authority warships, disregarding the risk to their own troops, were systematically dismantling the base. Karina's eyes snapped open wide with horror. They're targeting the extraction chamber, she gasped. Isolating it, they know, David cursed. The element extraction chamber, still under construction, was the most vulnerable point in the entire complex. If it fell, everything fell. Seal off sectors 4 through 6, he yelled, then grabbed Karina's arm. We have to move, now. His mind raced. He needed a daring plan, a way to turn the tables, the element, its instability, a reckless idea, but it was all he had. Karina, can you reroute power to the extraction chamber's containment field? It's unstable. She protested, but she was already accessing the network, her fingers flying across a makeshift console. That's the point, David said grimly. We're going to make them pay for every inch. He rallied a handful of Iridians, their faces etched with fear but their perseverance unwavering. With me, he shouted, charging towards the breach. For the hive. The ensuing firefight was a brutal dance of desperation. David, armed with a scavenged pulse rifle, moved with a ferocity born of desperation. He used the tight corridors and unfinished structures to his advantage, ambushing the heavily armored soldiers, drawing them deeper into the base, towards the extraction chamber. Each kill was a victory, but the boarding party's advance was relentless. Karina, her face pale and strained, managed to reroute power from the shield emitters, reinforcing the chamber's structural integrity. Containment field at 70%, she reported, her voice barely a whisper. But it won't hold for long under this bombardment. A figure detached itself from the boarding party, removing his helmet. A grizzled veteran, his face scarred and weathered, his eyes cold and calculating. He locked eyes with David. Clark, he growled, his voice amplified by his helmet's comm system. I should have known you'd be mixed up in this. David's blood ran cold. Commander Rourke. They had history, a bloody conflict on a forgotten colony, a betrayal that had cost David everything. This wasn't just about the element anymore. It was personal. Rourke gestured to the demolition units. Plant the charges, bypass the containment field. David cursed under his breath. Rourke knew him too well. He'd anticipated the trap. David sprinted towards the extraction chamber, firing his pulse rifle, trying to disrupt the demolition units. He had to stop them. Another earth-shattering explosion rocked the base. The lights flickered and died, plunging the corridor into near darkness. The bombardment was intensifying, tearing the base apart. Karina cried out, clutching her head. The hive, they're panicking, so many are. Her voice trailed off, choked with grief. David knew he was out of time. He activated the energy trap, overriding Karina's safety protocols. A surge of raw energy erupted from the chamber, incinerating everything in its path. A section of the base vanished in a blinding flash, taking a chunk of the boarding party with it. But the demolition units, they were still standing, battered, scorched, but alive, and the explosives were armed. The chamber door detonated with a deafening roar, showering the corridor with molten metal and superheated plasma. The extraction chamber was breached. The element, a pulsating sphere of iridescent energy, was exposed to the open environment. A wave of unstable energy pulsed outwards, warping the air, sending shivers down David's spine. The ground trembled, the planetoid. It was on the verge of imploding. Rourke's voice boomed over the comms, permeated with a chilling amusement. Clark, it's over. I'm offering you a courtesy. Hand over the Iridian and the Element Core and I'll guarantee you safe passage off this rock. Consider it a professional courtesy. David stared at the swirling energy of the element, the approaching authority soldiers, and then at Karina, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and trust. He straightened his shoulders. Go to hell, Rourke, David said, his voice unwavering. I stand with the hive. Sparks showered from the jury-rigged containment field, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. David wrestled with the magnetic clamps, his fist clenched as he tightened them against the surging energy. The element pulsed with an angry violet light, threatening to overwhelm their makeshift shielding. A sharp cry tore through the din. Karina staggered back, clutching her head. The thoughts, they're not mine. Her voice was a fractured whisper, imbued with pain. So many voices, pulling me apart. David glanced at the energy readings. They were spiking exponentially. Karina, focus. We need to stabilize the element. But her eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated. Images flickered across her face, vast, chitinous cities, swirling nebulae of thought, the cold, calculating logic of the hive. Memories, emotions, experiences not her own flooded her consciousness, a torrent threatening to drown her. It's the hive mind, David realized, his voice tight with urgency. The surge is disrupting it, but also amplifying individual consciousness. It's like a dam breaking. The klaxons blared, overridden by a harsh, amplified voice. Iridian facility, this is the authority. Prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile, David swore. They're not backing down, even with this energy signature going off the charts. He grabbed his blaster, his mind racing. He had to buy Karina time. He glanced at the control panel, his eyes settling on the emergency power conduits. An idea, reckless and desperate, formed in his mind. Karina, I need you to focus on the element. I'm going to create a distraction. He sprinted towards the corridor, grabbing detonators and lengths of salvaged wire. He slapped the detonators onto key structural supports, setting the timers. This is going to get messy, he muttered, arming the final charge. The explosions ripped through the lower levels, shaking the facility. Authority soldiers poured through the breaches, their weapons raised. But the primary force, drawn by the seismic activity, diverted from the element chamber. Back in the chamber, Karina knelt before the pulsing element, her brow furrowed in concentration. The fragmented memories still assaulted her, but she was learning to sift through them, to find patterns to understand. She was drowning in the collective knowledge of her people, but within that ocean of thought she found a thread of hope. Her fingers danced across the control panel, her touch now precise, confident. The element. She murmured, her voice stronger now. It has a resonance, a frequency that can shield us. It can protect the hive mind from external manipulation. David, returning from his diversion, his face grimy with soot, heard her words and felt a surge of relief. You found a way to protect them. Karina nodded, her eyes shining with newfound purpose. But it will require a shift, a change in how we perceive ourselves. She began transmitting modified instructions to the remaining Iridians, preparing them for the transformation. In the depths of the hive, a subtle shift began. The Iridians, for the first time, felt a flicker of individual identity, a sense of I separate from the collective we, yet still connected, still part of the whole. A heavy thud echoed from the doorway. The authority boarding party leader, a hulking figure in black armor, stood silhouetted against the flashing lights. His weapon was trained on David. Clark, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. You disappoint me, throwing away your life for these things. Orders are to bring the alien back alive. I will not ask again. David stood his ground, his blaster raised but wavering slightly. They're not just things, he retorted, his voice filled with defiance. They're people. And they deserve to live. The leader chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. Sentimental fool, sacrificing everything for inferiors. You humans are so predictable. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the leader staggered. His weapon clattered to the floor, useless. The other soldiers froze, their weapons dead in their hands. Karina stood behind them, her eyes glowing with an ethereal light. She had used her newly amplified consciousness to send a targeted electromagnetic pulse, disabling their weapons. The leader glared at her, his face contorted with rage. You, abomination! He lunged at David, his armored fist swinging. But the EMP had disoriented him. David ducked under the blow, disarming the leader with a swift move. As David pinned the leader to the ground, the man spat. You haven't won, Clark. I've already activated the beacon. Reinforcements are on their way, and I've overridden the failsafes. They're coming to sterilize this rock from orbit. He twisted his wrist, activating a hidden signal device. A red light pulsed urgently. David and Karina exchanged a look of dread. Above, the sky crackled with energy as multiple Authority dropships descended, engines screaming. But something else was happening. Within the hive, the Iridians were beginning to question the plan, to voice their doubts, to express their individual opinions. They were no longer a unified whole, blindly following Karina's instructions. They were thinking for themselves. Then the planetoid groaned. A deep, resonant rumble shook the facility, throwing David and Karina off their feet. The element was reaching critical mass. No, reroute power to the north shield. One voice screamed. Divert the energy to the east flank. Another countered. Seal the element chamber. A third insisted. Karina pressed her hands to her head, the conflicting thoughts of her people a chaotic storm in her mind. Their newfound independence, meant to strengthen them, was tearing them apart. Defenses needed to be coordinated, and now all she heard was a jumbled mess of suggestions, each pulling in a different direction. David watched her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Karina, what's happening?" They can't agree," she gasped, her silver skin shimmering with a sheen of sweat. "Everyone has their own idea, it's chaos." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," David said, his voice calm amidst the storm in her head. "They're thinking, really thinking for themselves. Embrace it." "What are they saying?" Karina hesitated, her violet eyes filled with doubt. "If we lose the unity of the hive mind, we lose everything." David stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I used to think the Authority, they were the protectors. I believed in order, in control, until I saw what that order cost. I saw planets sterilized, populations culled, all in the name of galactic peace. I left because I couldn't be a part of it anymore. I'm just an engineer, Karina. I don't have all the answers, but I know that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the most unexpected places. Trust their ingenuity." His words resonated with her, a stark reminder of the Authority's ruthlessness and the potential for something different. She took a shaky breath. "All right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me what you're thinking, all of you." The cacophony intensified, but this time Karina didn't try to suppress it. She focused, listening to each voice, each idea, each suggestion. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The Iridians, drawing on their collective knowledge of the planetoid's unstable geology, were formulating a plan. They want to weaponize the tremors," Karina said, her eyes widening in disbelief. "They can predict the next seismic event, the fault lines that will rupture." David stared at her, a mixture of awe and trepidation on his face. "They're going to trigger a localized quake, bury the dropships." "It's insane," Karina said. "The timing has to be perfect, the coordination. It will push them to their limits." The ground trembled violently as the first Authority dropships pierced the atmosphere, their metallic hulls gleaming in the dim light. They landed with a thunderous roar, deploying troops near the element chamber, their weapons trained on the entrance. A figure emerged from the lead dropship, his armor pristine and his voice amplified by a vocoder. "Iridian," the commander boomed, "surrender now or watch your people die." Karina stepped forward, her face a mask of willpower. "We surrender," she said, her voice deceptively meek. Every second counted. The commander smirked, his eyes cold and calculating. Wise choice. But as he spoke, Karina felt a surge of energy from her people, a collective focus of will unlike anything she had ever experienced. This wasn't the chaotic storm of before. This was a unified purpose, channeled through their newly independent minds. "Now!" Karina screamed, her voice echoing across the desolate landscape. The Iridians focused their collective will on a specific point beneath the Authority troops, a weak spot in the planetoid's crust that they had identified and amplified. The ground beneath the Authority troops erupted with a deafening roar, swallowing the dropships whole and scattering the remaining soldiers like ragdolls. Molten rock and superheated gas spewed into the air, creating a scene of utter devastation. The Authority commander, miraculously, survived the initial tremor, his armor scorched and dented but still functional. He scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with rage. He raised his weapon, targeting Karina. "You will pay for this, alien." He tossed a grenade, a small metallic sphere that arced through the air towards Karina. An Iridian soldier, one who just moments ago had been lost in the confusion of independent thought, lunged forward, intercepting the grenade with his own body. The explosion ripped through the air, throwing Karina clear but leaving her disoriented and vulnerable. The Iridian soldier was gone, a sacrifice made in the name of their newfound freedom. David, seeing Karina's peril, charged towards the authority commander, intercepting him before he could deliver a killing blow. They clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, the fate of the Iridians hanging in the balance. The planetoid shook violently, the tremors growing stronger with each passing second. The element in the chamber was reaching critical mass, threatening to tear the entire planetoid apart. David strained against the crushing weight, the authority commander's armored fist grinding into his throat. Each breath was a ragged, burning fight. The commander's bulk, amplified by the powered armor, pressed down with relentless force. Sweat stung David's eyes, blurring the already dim emergency lights of the element chamber. Then the world lurched. A grinding groan echoed through the metal framework as the planetoid shuddered. David's boots scraped against the slick metal plating, losing purchase. The commander capitalized instantly, twisting his weight, throwing David off balance. He slammed against the wall, the impact stealing his breath. "Traitor," the commander spat, his voice amplified by the armor's Vox system, imbued with contempt. "You were one of the best, David, a rising star, Commander Clark they called you, and you threw it all away for this." He gestured around the crumbling chamber, his gauntlet inches from David's face. For a species the galaxy deemed worthless. Through the haze of pain, David saw Karina, huddled near the doorway, her large eyes wide with fear and confusion. She swayed slightly, still disoriented from the earlier explosions. He remembered his promise to her, his plea for her to trust her people. The words echoed in his mind, a desperate mantra. A jolt like a surge of electricity passed through Karina. It wasn't her own thought, but a chorus, a rising tide of fear and desperation from the Iridians linked to her. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a flicker of persistence, a nascent understanding. She focused, remembering David's unwavering gaze, his willingness to risk everything. A tremor ran through her delicate frame. The chamber rumbled again, louder this time. Above the commander, clinging precariously to a fractured support beam, a cluster of rock and metal debris shifted. Karina focused her will, reaching out with her mind, amplifying the collective desire of her people. Now, the debris broke free. A shower of rock and twisted metal rained down on the authority commander. He roared in surprise, momentarily releasing his grip on David to raise an arm in defense. It was the opening David needed. He scrambled back, kicking out at the commander's legs, throwing him off balance. He wrenched the energy pistol from the commander's grasp, tossing it aside. But even disarmed, the commander was dangerous. He lunged, his armored fist connecting with David's jaw. Stars exploded behind David's eyes. The commander, regaining his footing, grinned. "Foolish of you, David, did you think you could win?" He tapped a sequence on his gauntlet. "I always have a backup plan." A high-pitched whine filled the chamber. "Say goodbye, traitor." David grabbed Karina, pulling her close. "Brace yourself." He dove behind a thick support strut as the commander's armor erupted in a blinding flash. The force of the explosion slammed into them, a wave of heat and pressure that ripped through the chamber. Metal shrieked and the ground bucked beneath them. The element chamber groaned, the network of cracks spiderwebbing across its surface growing wider, glowing with an ominous green light. Radiation. Karina cried, coughing. The air crackled with a dangerous energy. The cracks in the chamber pulsed, emitting waves of harmful radiation. Karina stared at the failing structure, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The shelter. It will collapse, my people." They will die. David gripped her shoulders, his voice urgent. Not if we can help it. Get your people to the core shelter now. It's the most shielded part of the structure. I'll find a way to stabilize this chamber. Hesitation flickered across Karina's face. Trust you, again. The fear for her people warred with the ingrained distrust of outsiders. David reached into a hidden compartment in his suit, pulling out a small metallic device, a radiation shield generator. I came prepared. I wouldn't risk your people, Karina, I promise. The sight of the shield generator, a tangible symbol of David's commitment, seemed to break through Karina's doubt. She nodded, her eyes filled with a newfound perseverance. Come, my people, she called out, her voice resonating with an authority she had never possessed before. She turned and led the Iridians towards the core shelter, her brow furrowed with concentration, battling the rising tide of panic within the hive mind. The chaotic thoughts of her people threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed forward, fueled by David's trust and the desperate need to protect them. David watched them go, then turned back to the crumbling element chamber. He had minutes, maybe less. He raced to a nearby console, his fingers flying across the controls. He needed to reinforce the chamber to seal the cracks. He grabbed salvaged metal plating, welding it into place with frantic haste. The chamber groaned again, the cracks widening. He was losing time. He scanned the damaged control panels, searching for a solution. He needed something to contain the energy to stabilize the element, but he was missing something vital, a key component, a regulator only found in authority tech. Desperation clawed at him. He couldn't fully stabilize the chamber, not without risking everything. An idea, reckless and daring, formed in his mind. He could reroute power from the shelter's life support systems, creating a temporary energy field around the chamber. It would buy them time, but it would leave the Iridians vulnerable. He glanced towards the core shelter, then back at the failing chamber. He had no other choice. He initiated the sequence, his fingers trembling as he bypassed safety protocols. Alarms blared, the lights flickered, and the air grew noticeably colder. In the core shelter, the Iridians began to stir, a wave of disorientation and fear rippling through their ranks. The recycled air thinned and the temperature dropped. Karina felt their panic, amplified by the hive mind. Doubts assailed her. Had she made the right choice? Had she trusted David too easily? She fought back the rising tide of fear, focusing her will, projecting calm. Trust him, she broadcast to her people. The discomfort is temporary. He is trying to save us. Her words resonated with the Iridians, a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. David threw the final switch. A surge of power coursed through the chamber, arcing across the damaged machinery. A shimmering energy field enveloped the element chamber, containing the radiation, stabilizing the structure. For now. But the shelter was without life support. The air was growing thin, the temperature plummeting. He had bought them time, but at a terrible cost. The energy field around the element chamber sputtered, a sickly green flare momentarily illuminating the shelter in an unnatural glow. The air crackled with static, raising the hairs on David's arms. He glanced at the monitor, a cobbled-together display of scavenged parts, the numbers flashing ominously. Life support systems completely offline, David announced, his voice tight. A digital timer blinked red, 00:17:32. 17 minutes, 32 seconds until the radiation shielding failed. Not enough time. Beside him, Karina's mandibles clicked nervously. The Iridians, they are agitated, the lack of atmosphere. It is amplifying their fear. Their thoughts are fracturing. David ran a hand through his hair, the gesture more frantic than reassuring. Damn it. He swiped at the holographic schematics of the shelter, the blue lines shimmering in the dim light. He muttered, there has to be something. A backup, an override. He zoomed in on the power conduits, tracing the flow with his finger. Nothing. There is something, Karina said, her voice regaining a measure of its usual calm. A forgotten survey, geological, deep scan. She pointed to a section of the schematic David had overlooked, a series of faint, almost invisible lines. Geothermal vent system below the surface. David stared at the lines, hope flickering in his chest. Geothermal, you're sure? The data is old, Karina cautioned. But if we could tap into that energy, it could restore life support, perhaps even stabilize the element chamber. He did a quick calculation in his head, factoring in the depth of the vents, the likely energy output, and the time remaining. It's a long shot, Karina, but it's the only shot we've got. He grabbed his environmental suit. The moment they stepped outside the core shelter, the temperature hit them like a physical blow. Sub-zero air clawed at any exposed skin. The wind howled, carrying with it the stench of sulfur and ozone. Toxic gas pockets, Karina warned, her voice tight in his ear through the comms. Concentrations fluctuate. I can sense safe pathways. For now. She moved with a strange, almost unnatural grace, her multi-jointed legs finding purchase on the treacherous terrain. David followed close behind, relying on her senses to guide him through the swirling mists. They passed the skeletal remains of what was once an Authority mining facility. Twisted metal and corroded cables lay scattered across the landscape, testament to a project abandoned long ago. They were here, David said, his voice grim, trying to tap into the geothermal energy themselves. What happened? Unforeseen technical challenges, Karina replied. Resource limitations perhaps, or something else. A high-pitched whine pierced the air. An alarm, distant but unmistakable. David froze. Security system, they're still active. He pulled out a scanner, sweeping the area. It pinged weakly on a structure half buried in the ice. Long-range communication device, partially functional. He fiddled with the controls, trying to amplify the signal. Static. Then a garbled voice, barely audible. Vessel, approaching, unauthorized, sector. Karina's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. The Iridians, they are losing hope. The transmission, the alarm. They fear we are doomed. Some, they begin to doubt you. David felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He turned to Karina, his voice urgent. We don't have time for this. We need to get to those geothermal vents. But the Iridians, Karina hesitated. Their fear, it is overwhelming. They will not follow if they do not trust. Trust. David exploded, his voice echoing across the desolate landscape. I'm risking my neck to save them, and they're worried about trust. I don't have time to hold their hands. He immediately regretted his outburst. Karina flinched, her multifaceted eyes reflecting his own frustration and desperation. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Okay, you're right. But how do we fix this? How do we reassure them when we're about to be vaporized by the Authority? I need to reach them. Amplify my connection to the hive mind. I can soothe their fears, reinforce their trust. David stared at her, a plan forming in his mind. I have an idea. Risky, but it might work. He reached into his pack, pulling out a device he had cobbled together from salvaged tech, a neural amplifier. This was designed for something else entirely, but it might boost your connection. It's a long shot. He quickly recalibrated the device, rerouting the power flow and adjusting the frequency. Hold still. He carefully attached the amplifier to Karina's head, the wires snaking around her carapace. Ready, she said, her voice barely a whisper. David activated the amplifier. A low hum filled the air. Karina's body stiffened, her mandibles clicking rapidly. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. I feel them, she gasped. Their fear, their doubt, but also their hope, their willingness to believe. She closed her eyes, focusing her will. A wave of calm seemed to wash over the landscape. The wind died down, the toxic gas dissipated slightly. They trust you, David, Karina said, her voice stronger now. They will follow. They continued towards the geothermal vents, reaching the main access point only to find it blocked by a massive rock slide. Jagged boulders and twisted metal formed an impassable barrier. Damn it, David exclaimed, kicking at a loose rock. Of course. Karina reached out a hand, touching one of the larger boulders. The rocks. They are unstable, crystalline formations. They emit a disruptive energy field. It interferes with my connection to the hive mind. As if on cue, the sky above them was lit up by a powerful beam of light. The searchlight of the authority vessel. It swept across the surface of the planetoid, growing closer with each agonizing second. The rockslide loomed, a chaotic jumble of fractured stone and twisted metal that stretched across the narrow access tunnel. Dust motes danced in the weak light of David's headlamp, each particle a tiny reminder of the instability surrounding them. He ran a hand along a jagged edge, feeling the tremor in the rock. She's bigger than I thought, and this whole area, it's not stable. Embedded within the rock were crystalline formations, like shards of amethyst that pulsed with a faint, internal light. They radiated an almost palpable energy, a subtle vibration that tickled the skin. Those crystals, David muttered, they're the source of the disruption. Karina extended a tendril towards the nearest crystal, her multifaceted eyes narrowing. She was attempting to use her hive mind connection to move the rocks, but a wave of pain washed over her, her body spasming, and she recoiled. The energy, it burns, it's like needles in my mind. Her voice was strained, each word an effort. David knelt beside her, concern etched on his face. I think I know what's happening. These crystals are amplifying naturally occurring radiation. It's creating a feedback loop, disrupting neural pathways. Think of it like static on a radio signal, but for your mind. We can't move the rocks, Karina gasped, clutching her head. Not like this. David stood, his gaze sweeping over the abandoned mining facility that loomed in the distance. Rusting machinery and decaying structures were silhouetted against the dim light. There's still a chance. The authorities' mining equipment. Maybe we can use it to create a localized electromagnetic pulse, an EMP. Just enough to neutralize the crystals temporarily. Karina's tendrils tightened. An EMP, David, that could harm the hive mind, even in its weakened state. I know, David said, his voice firm but gentle. But I'll minimize the range, the intensity. Focus it solely on the crystals blocking the access point. I promise, Karina, I won't risk your people. He met her gaze, his eyes filled with purpose. We have to try. They made their way to the dilapidated mining facility. The air was thick with the smell of decay and ozone, a testament to the authorities' hasty abandonment. After a tense search, they located a functional power cell tucked away in a dusty control room. The cell hummed with latent energy, a lifeline in this desolate place. As David worked to connect the power cell to a makeshift EMP device salvaged from the mining equipment, he stumbled upon a fragmented log entry on a damaged datapad. The words flickered on the screen, ghostly remnants of a forgotten experiment. Crystals exhibiting unexpected mutation, unforeseen psychic resonance, amplifying geothermal activity beyond predicted parameters. The entry trailed off, corrupted by data loss. He skipped to another fragment, intended to enhance geothermal energy extraction, instead creating a dangerous feedback loop. Subjects exhibiting signs of mental instability. David's brow furrowed. He understood. The authority hadn't abandoned the project because of technical challenges. They had abandoned it because the crystals posed a threat to their own minds. They weren't just oppressors, they were self-serving cowards. A harsh, metallic voice crackled through the comm system, shattering the silence. Unidentified vessel, this is Authority Vessel Retribution. You are in violation of Galactic Edict 347B. Surrender David Clark immediately. The Iridian lifeforms are to be exterminated without delay. Resistance is futile. David ignored the transmission. He focused on the task at hand, his fingers flying across the makeshift control panel. He activated the EMP. A wave of energy pulsed outwards, invisible but potent. The crystalline formations shuddered, their internal light flickering violently before shattering into dust. The rock slide settled, a narrow path cleared through the debris. Karina winced, her body trembling. Pain. A surge of pain, but now, calmer, the energy, it's fading. They moved quickly, navigating the treacherous path to the geothermal tap. It was a complex network of pipes and conduits designed to channel the planetoid's internal heat. Working together, David and Karina rerouted the energy flow, directing it towards the shelter's life support systems. A moment later, the lights flickered on within the shelter. The air filtration system whirred to life, and the temperature began to rise. Breathable air filled their lungs, a tangible sign of hope. As the geothermal energy stabilized, Karina paused, her tendrils twitching. I feel a connection to the planetoid itself. Through the crystals, a new awareness, spreading among the hive. David frowned. What do you mean? The geothermal energy. It's infused with the energy of the crystals, Karina explained, creating a unique resonance within the shelter. The enhanced geothermal energy resonated within Karina's mind, amplifying her individual thoughts. The tendrils on her head began to unfurl as she felt the hive's presence receding. She felt as though she was walking away from the hive, but still connected to them as they felt the same. The shelter was separating her from the hive, granting her even greater mental autonomy. Suddenly, a red alert flashed on David's wrist-mounted scanner. A proximity alarm blared. We've got company. Authority vessel locked onto our location. They're preparing to initiate a direct assault. The scanner showed the vessel outside the planetoid's atmosphere. The small vessel was outgunned, but the Authority was unaware of the changes happening within the shelter and what they were about to face. The holographic display shimmered, a ghostly projection of the Authority vessel hanging in the air between David and Karina. Its size was obscene, a jagged knife poised to slice through their fragile sanctuary. Shielding is negligible, David muttered, tracing a finger across the vessel's schematic. Weaponry. Disintegrator cannons, standard plasma array, and something else. Energy signatures off the charts. A siege weapon, maybe. Karina's multifaceted eyes, usually pools of serene calm, flickered with a barely perceptible unease. Direct confrontation. Ill-advised, probability of success. Minimal. Understatement of the century, David agreed, forcing a wry smile. So we play hide and seek. Only this time the stakes are a little higher than capture the flag. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the pulsing geothermal vents visible through the shelter's reinforced viewport. Remember how we were talking about amplifying the geothermal energy and those crystals? Karina's head tilted, the chitinous plates of her neck shifting slightly. Localized cloaking field. Mask energy signature, concealment, optimal. David ran the calculations, his fingers flying across the makeshift console. The numbers swam before his eyes, a stark reminder of their limited resources. It'll work, he announced, his voice tight with a mix of relief and apprehension. But it'll drain a significant portion of our life support reserves. We're talking about cutting it close, Karina. Aboard the Dominion's hammer, Captain Vorlag sneered at the tactical display. Iridians, primitive insects, and a misguided human traitor. This will be over before the next shift rotation. He steepled his fingers, a cruel glint in his eyes. Prepare a full planetary bombardment. I want nothing left but dust. Back in the shelter, the crystals hummed with a building intensity, bathing the chamber in an ethereal glow. Karina focused her will, manipulating the crystalline resonance with an almost imperceptible touch. The air crackled with energy, a silent symphony of power. Outside, the Dominion's hammer lost its targeting lock. Alarms blared on the bridge, quickly silenced by Vorlag's furious commands. Report, he barked, his face contorted with rage. Target lock lost, Captain, a nervous ensign stammered. Sensors indicate some form of interference or deception, sir. Vorlag slammed a fist on the console. Manual scan, I want a full spectrum sweep of the area. Now. As the cloaking field solidified, David noticed a spike in the sensor readings. Something was happening, something unexpected. "Karina," he said urgently, "the cloaking field. It's amplifying the Iridian's collective consciousness. It's creating a psychic beacon." Karina gasped, clutching her head. A torrent of emotions, memories, and sensations flooded her mind, overwhelming her individual consciousness. Images flashed before her eyes, the ancient history of her people, the pain of their displacement, the faint glimmer of hope for the future. The weight of the hive mind threatened to crush her. "Too much," she whispered, her voice strained. "Minds merging, losing self." David grabbed her hand, his touch grounding her in the present. "We need to dampen the amplification, Karina. But we can't disable the cloaking field, not now." He frantically searched his memory, sifting through the salvaged tech they had scavenged from the derelict mining equipment. "The sonic emitter," he said, his eyes widening with a sudden realization. "We can modify it to disrupt the specific frequencies of the psychic beacon." Karina's eyes snapped open, a flicker of fear in their depths. Disrupt frequencies, harm hive mind, irreparable damage, possible. David hesitated, his stomach churning with doubt. "I know," he said, his voice low, "but attracting more attention from the authority, that's a death sentence for all of you." He met her gaze, pleading for understanding. "We have to try, Karina. We don't have a choice." Karina stared at him, her expression unreadable. The fate of her people rested on her decision, on her trust in this human. Finally, she nodded, a single decisive movement. "Authorize, use emitter, fate, in your hands." David took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He carefully calibrated the sonic emitter, adjusting the frequencies with painstaking precision. The device whirred to life, emitting a low, dissonant hum that vibrated through the shelter. He watched Karina, his face etched with concern. Her body trembled, but she remained steadfast, her eyes fixed on him with unwavering trust. Aboard the Dominion's hammer, the results of the manual scan came back. "Captain," the sensor officer reported, "we've detected a faint energy signature emanating from the planetoid's core, but it's consistent with natural geothermal activity." Vorlag frowned, unconvinced. "Geothermal activity, on a dead rock like this? Send down a probe. I want a closer look." The probe descended, a metallic insect drawn to the planetoid's surface. David and Karina watched its approach on the monitor, their faces grim. "It's coming in fast," David said, his voice tight with tension. "We don't have much time." Then he noticed something strange in the probe's trajectory, a subtle anomaly that sent a chill down his spine. "Wait a minute," he said, his eyes widening in horror. "It's programmed to detonate upon reaching a certain depth." He looked at Karina, his face pale with realization. The authority, they knew about the geothermal activity. They intended to destroy the planetoid from the inside, regardless of the Iridians. Karina, her eyes glazed over, spoke in a voice that was not entirely her own. It was the voice of the hive, ancient and vast. "They do not seek to eliminate. They seek to possess the planetoid. It is not the Iridians they want. It is the energy, a weapon, of unimaginable power." "Of unimaginable power," David finished, his voice tight. He stared at the probe schematics shimmering in the air above the console. "If that thing goes off where it's supposed to, it won't just crack this rock. It'll destabilize half the shelter, cause cave-ins, and probably unleash the geothermal energy in ways we can't control." Karina's chitinous fingers danced across the console, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the flickering light. "The detonation radius. It intersects critical support structures, unacceptable losses." David turned to her, his face grim. "We have to stop it, I'm thinking. We try to hack its navigation, redirect it." Karina tilted her head, a gesture that, despite her alien features, he now recognized as thoughtful consideration. "Hacking. A remote probe, its systems will be heavily shielded. Shielded, not impenetrable. You know this tech better than anyone. What about the hive mind? Can it find a way in?" Karina closed her eyes for a moment, her body subtly vibrating. "The hive. It sees pathways, a back door. In the initial programming sequence, an oversight, but exploiting it, requires a precise energy surge, a specific frequency. Frequency I can generate. David was already moving, pulling up schematics on a nearby monitor. Remember those mining rigs we scavenged, the sonic emitters? I can jury-rig something. He worked quickly, his hands flying over the salvaged components. Wires sparked and the air filled with the ozone tang of ozone. Almost there, he flipped a switch. Here goes nothing. A surge of energy pulsed through the makeshift device. Attempt failed, Karina stated, her voice flat. Energy signature, insufficient, probe systems, unaffected. A red light began flashing on the probe schematics. Internal diagnostics, detecting intrusion, initiating detonation sequence, time frame, shortened significantly. The countdown timer now displayed a single ominous digit. 5. Karina recoiled, her eyes wide with a sudden terrifying understanding. The hive, it sees, ships, authority ships, they are positioned to contain the blast, to prevent the energy from reaching space. David's breath hitched. Contain it, they're not just destroying the planetoid, they're harvesting the energy. That's what this is about, a superweapon. We are doomed, Karina said, her voice devoid of hope. David hit his fist on the console. Not yet, not if we can give them something else to chase. The cloaking field. What if we use it to mask a smaller burst of geothermal energy, a decoy? Let them deal with that while we figure something else out. Karina hesitated, her mandibles clicking nervously. A geothermal burst, even localized, it could attract other entities in this sector, entities the authority has been trying to keep out. David met her gaze, his expression unwavering. Failing to act guarantees destruction. This gives us a chance, a small one, but a chance nonetheless. He saw the internal struggle in her eyes, the conflict between her ingrained caution and her growing trust in him. Finally, she nodded, a flicker of willpower returning to her face. Initiate the sequence. I will override my internal concerns. David moved to the sonic emitter controls, his fingers dancing across the panel, adjusting frequency, creating a controlled disruption of the cloaking field, focusing the energy into a concentrated beam. Outside, deep beneath the surface, the probe hung in the darkness, its sensors pulsing. 3, 2. Then a surge of energy, raw and untamed, erupted from a pinpoint on the planetoid's surface. The authority probe, moments from oblivion, registered the anomaly. Its programming shifted, its trajectory altered. It hurtled towards the beam's origin. The localized geothermal burst ripped through the rock, a visible distortion in the air. On the monitors, David saw the authority ships begin to reposition, drawn to the energy release like moths to a flame. They are taking the bait. But on the lead ship, the authority captain narrowed his eyes, suspicion clouding his face. That energy signature, too clean, too focused. I don't like it. Override containment protocol. Full-scale surface scan. Now. The ships unleashed a barrage of sensors, bathing the planetoid in electromagnetic radiation. Deep beneath the surface, the cloaking field flickered, momentarily overwhelmed. They are scanning, Karina hissed, her voice tinged with panic. They will find us. And then it happened. A blip appeared on the authority captain's screen, a hidden structure, a shelter. There, he barked. Coordinates locked, prepare for immediate. Karina gasped, her body convulsing. The hive, they know, they feel it, the deception. The end. David watched in horror as the authority ships changed course, their weapons batteries charging. They were no longer containing the energy. They were coming for them. Suddenly, a garbled message crackled over a rarely used comm channel, a channel David hadn't touched in years. Static filled the air, then a voice, strained and urgent, broke through. Barrier. Failed, they, coming through. Barrier, failed, they, coming through. David's breath hitched. He spun from the comms panel, eyes locking with Karina's. The faint blue glow of her skin pulsed with a frantic energy. They're here, she breathed, her voice a low hum that resonated within his skull. How long? David barked, already striding toward the main monitoring station. Karina's multi-jointed fingers danced across the holographic display. Minutes, their trajectory. They're not slowing, direct assault. The display showed 3 Authority cruisers, their weapons ports already glowing ominously. David cursed. The mining lasers won't even scratch their paint. Shields up. Minimal, Karina replied, her voice tight. Repurposed energy conduits. They were never meant for this. David's eyes hardened. Get everyone to the deepest levels. Reinforce the structural integrity. Now. He slammed a fist on the comm panel, his voice echoing through the shelter. All Iridians, this is a red alert. Proceed to sub-level 4 immediately. Reinforce all structural supports. This is not a drill. He could feel the tremor in the metal deck plating as hundreds of Iridians scrambled to obey. Karina remained at the console, her brow furrowed. David, I'm detecting a coded transmission between the Authority ships. Encrypted, but you can crack it, David finished, his gaze fixed on the incoming ships. A moment later, Karina gasped. They're prioritizing Section 7, the containment unit. David's blood ran cold. Section 7. That's where they had placed the salvaged Iridian hive mind technology. The piece of tech that allowed the hive to be together and still think and learn independently. It was the key to their future. They don't just want to eliminate them, David realized, the pieces clicking into place. They want to weaponize the hive mind. A bitter taste rose in his throat. The Authority. He remembered his time with them, believing in the cause, protecting the galaxy. It was only after they ordered other atrocities that he left and sought to atone for it. He once believed they were the protectors of society. We have to stop them, Karina said, her voice filled with a newfound grit. I have an idea, David said, his mind racing. A long shot, the geothermal energy regulator. We overload it, create a localized imp. Karina's eyes widened. The regulator. David, that could work, but the EMP could cripple the shelter's life support. We'd lose atmosphere power. It's a risk I'm willing to take, David said, meeting her gaze. A quick death is better than being enslaved and weaponized by those bastards. Karina hesitated, her mandibles clicking softly. They would dissect us, use our minds for their own purposes. She looked at David, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Do it. All right, David said, his voice grim. Let's recalibrate that regulator. They raced toward the geothermal control room, the shelter shaking violently as the Authority ships began their assault. Precision strikes targeted the entrance points, causing cave-ins and structural damage. Alarms blared, casting the corridors in a harsh red light. Inside the control room, David ripped open the access panel to the regulator, sparks flying as he bypassed safety protocols. Rerouting power from the core systems, maximizing the range. They're through the outer defenses. Karina shouted, her voice strained. They're targeting Section 7 directly. David thumped his hand on the activation switch. The entire planetoid shuddered. A surge of energy, visible even through the thick rock, washed over the landscape. The Authority ships caught in the blast went dark. EMP deployed. David yelled, but his triumph was short-lived. The lights in the shelter flickered, then died. The artificial atmosphere thinned, and a chilling silence descended. Panic erupted in the lower levels. David could hear the frantic cries of the Iridians, their fear amplified by the loss of their hive-mind connection. Karina, her eyes glowing intensely, reached out with her mind. Quiet, she commanded, her voice echoing in the darkness. We are not defeated. Emergency airlocks. Ration your oxygen. We will survive. Despite the EMP, one of the Authority ships, a hulking cruiser, managed to launch a small, shielded transport. It streaked toward the planetoid, its trajectory locked on Section 7. They're still coming, David said, grabbing a crude mining laser and a length of sharpened rebar. Looks like we're doing this the old-fashioned way. David, wait, Karina cried. I'm sensing something. Another ship, approaching fast, the energy signature. It's unlike anything I've ever encountered. Suddenly, a ship decloaked directly between the Authority ships and the planetoid. It was sleek and black, its design unlike anything David had ever seen. Before anyone could react, it emitted a pulse of pure energy. One of the Authority ships simply vaporized, gone. David stared in disbelief. Then a message crackled over the comms, now clear and ungarbled. "We have been watching you. The Authority cannot be allowed to control the hive. We can help you escape, but you must trust us." David stood frozen, the improvised weapon clutched in his hand. The boarding party was still inbound, and now this. An unknown ship, an impossible offer. Defend the shelter, or abandon everything and trust a stranger. The fate of the Iridians, and perhaps his own, hung in the balance. David's breath hitched. The unknown ship, hope, or a more insidious trap. His mind raced, calculating probabilities, weighing the lives of the Iridians against the potential for betrayal. He had seconds. "Trust them," he barked, the words raw in his throat. "It's our only chance." He turned to Karina, his gaze locking with hers. "Get everyone ready to move. Now, overriding your concerns, this is not a request." He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the inherent caution of the hive mind warring with the desperate need for salvation. But she nodded, her expression hardening with grim willpower. The boarding party, clad in black armor, breached the shelter's final defenses with a deafening explosion. Alarms blared, painting the corridors in strobing red light. David, flanked by a handful of Iridian warriors armed with repurposed mining lasers and sharpened shards of crystal, braced for the onslaught. This was it, a desperate rearguard action. "Fall back, funnel them." David yelled, his voice barely audible above the chaos. He knew the shelter's layout better than anyone, every twist and turn, every crumbling support beam. He led the boarding party into a narrow corridor, triggering a series of hastily rigged traps, pressure plates that unleashed torrents of scalding steam, tripwires that sent cascades of debris tumbling down. Karina's voice, a cool, calm presence in his mind, guided the Iridian warriors. "They are flanking to the east. Seal the passage. Divert power to the laser grid." Their movements were impossibly coordinated, a silent ballet of death. David watched in awe as they anticipated the boarding party's every move, their actions flowing together with an almost supernatural grace. The true extent of the hive mind's capabilities slammed into him. This wasn't just communication, it was shared consciousness, a single, unified fighting force. Suddenly, a series of high-pitched whines filled the air. Small, sleek drones, no bigger than his hand, zipped past, emitting pulses of energy that systematically disabled the remaining Authority security systems. Cameras flickered and died, automated turrets fell silent. The drones then converged on a section of the wall, cutting a precise, circular hole, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel, an escape route. The shelter groaned, the structural integrity failing with alarming speed. Cave-ins became more frequent, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. The emergency lights flickered erratically, threatening to plunge them into darkness. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of ozone. Radiation surge, Sector 4, Karina's voice echoed in his mind, tinged with urgency. Geothermal core breach. Containment failing. David cursed. He raced towards the sector, his boots crunching on broken rock. He reached the damaged core to find scorch marks that wasn't from the M-pulse, but a directed explosion. Sabotage. The enemy was within. The drones began assisting with the evacuation, their anti-gravity fields gently lifting injured Iridians and carrying them towards the escape tunnel. Outside, the battle raged. The Authority ships, having partially restored their power, unleashed a barrage of laser fire on the unknown ship, forcing it to weave and dodge in a desperate attempt to stay alive. Then, a chilling realization. One of the Authority ships had broken away from the dogfight and was now lining up a shot on the escape tunnel entrance. A direct hit would collapse the tunnel, burying them all alive. A crackle of static, then a voice, distorted but clear, filled David's mind. We can no longer guarantee your safety. You must leave immediately. There is one more ship with the same capabilities coming, but it is many minutes away. David's heart sank. Minutes they didn't have. He looked at the Iridian warriors, their faces grim but resolute. He knew what he had to do. Everyone, evacuate now, leave the rear guard. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He saw the question in Karina's eyes, the unspoken plea, but he couldn't afford sentiment. Staying would doom them all. He grabbed Karina's hand, his grip tight. Come on, we have to go. They plunged into the escape tunnel, the remaining Iridians scrambling after them. As they reached the far end, a deafening roar echoed behind them. The Authority ship had fired. The tunnel entrance collapsed in a cataclysmic explosion, sealing the passage with tons of rock and debris. They stumbled into a vast, hidden cavern, illuminated by the faint, ethereal glow of bioluminescent fungi. And there, nestled in the heart of the cavern, was a sight that made David's heart leap with hope. A dormant Iridian transport ship, its hull scarred and weathered but undeniably intact. Beside it, an Iridian engineer, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with feverish intensity, worked frantically at a console, sparks flying from his makeshift repair tools. They had a plan all along. They sabotaged the transport, the Iridian engineer rasped, his chitinous face contorted in dismay. Cut the power conduits, severed the hyperdrive linkage. Authority, agents. Karina closed her eyes, her mandibles twitching. A low hum emanated from her throat as she reached out with her enhanced hive mind, probing the collective consciousness of her people. Images flashed through her mind, fear, desperation, and a sliver of something else. Deceit. Her eyes snapped open, focusing on a small cluster of Iridians huddled near the transport's loading ramp. The saboteurs. They were promised preferential treatment, a place among the Authority spared from extermination. David's fists tight. Show me. He grabbed a plasma cutter and, with Karina directing, began barking orders. Reroute power from the shelter's auxiliary generators. Salvage the hyperdrive regulator from the old ship. We're improvising. Hours blurred into a frantic dance of sparks, sweat, and muttered curses. David, fueled by adrenaline and a burning sense of injustice, worked alongside the Iridians, his movements precise and efficient. As the repairs neared completion, two figures emerged from the shadows, clad in Authority uniforms. Clark, the lead agent sneered, leveling a disruptor rifle. Stand down. The Iridians are to be terminated. You are interfering with a lawful order. Lawful. David spat, his eyes blazing. You want to exterminate an entire species because you want to control their hive mind. You want to turn them into a weapon. The agent smirked. A valuable asset wasted on a dying race. Karina, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. The shelter, it will let us keep the hive mind, but it will also let each of us think. Learn. Independently. A collective gasp rippled through the Iridians. A klaxon blared, shaking the transport ship. Incoming. An Iridian shouted. The Authority fleet materialized in orbit, led by a massive flagship, its hull filled with weapons. A pulse cannon, larger than any David had ever seen, charged on its bow. EMP cannon, Karina stated grimly. They'll disable the ship before we can even launch. David stared at the charging weapon, then back at the planetoid beneath their feet. There's still the geothermal core. Karina's eyes widened. Overload it. Create a localized EMP. It's insane, but it might just work, David finished, a grim smile spreading across his face. Let's get to work. They raced back to the shelter, Karina rerouting power conduits while David bypassed safety protocols. The ground trembled as the geothermal core began to whine, energy surging through the planetoid's veins. Now, Karina cried. David smacked his fist down on the activation switch. The shelter's lights flickered, then died. A low rumble built into a deafening roar as the geothermal core reached CRMS. El Mas. A blinding flash erupted from the planetoid's surface. followed by a wave of electromagnetic energy that washed over the Authority fleet. The flagship, along with the escorting cruisers, sputtered and died, their systems fried. Alarms blared as the transport ship, shielded by its own internal systems, powered up its engines. "Go, go, go," David yelled, ushering the Iridians onto the ship. He and Karina were the last to board, just as the transport's engines roared to life. The ship hurtled skyward, leaving the disabled Authority fleet behind. From orbit, they watched as the planetoid began to crack and crumble, its surface fracturing into a million pieces. The geothermal overload had destabilized its core. "It's breaking apart," David said, his voice tight. "A sacrifice," Karina replied, her eyes fixed on the crumbling world. "A new beginning." She turned to address her people, her voice amplified throughout the ship. "Iridians. We are free. The Authority can no longer control us. We will find a new home, a place where we can live in peace and thrive. We will remember those we lost, but we will not be defined by our past. We will build a future together." A cheer erupted, filling the transport with a wave of hope. David stood beside Karina, watching the swirling asteroid field that was once a planetoid. "We did it," he said softly. "We did," Karina replied, her mandibles curving into a smile. "Thank you, David." David looked at her, at the strength and persistence in her eyes. "Saving you, saving them. It reminded me what I was fighting for, that there's still good in this galaxy worth protecting." The transport ship shuddered as it initiated the hyperspace jump, a swirling vortex of light engulfing the vessel. They were leaving behind the tyranny of the Authority, the shadow of extermination. They were embarking on a journey to find a new home, a place where the Iridians could finally be free.